chronicling the latest cannabis industry news and headlines. Welcome to the State of Cannabis, bringing you fact-based news and views and keeping listeners on the pulse of what's happening in the industry today. Advocates and analysts will join us to discuss the ongoing path to reform and legislation. Now, the State of Cannabis, with your host, Dave Inman.
Welcome to the State of Cannabis, folks. I'm your host, Dave Inman. With us tonight, we have Daniel Stockmann from the Nebraska Interstate Drug Defense. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you.
Nebraska, it's a border state for what we would call, our typical either recreational or medical marijuana, and we do see some troubles generally at the borders. However, it sounds like Nebraska might have had a few more occurrences than others. Tell me what you're experiencing there in your home state.
We're experiencing quite a bit of increase in enforcement along the interstate. Interstate 80 is the interstate that travels east to west through Nebraska, connects with Interstate 76, which is in the panhandle of western Nebraska, which obviously borders Nebraska. In the last year or so, we've seen quite an uptick in enforcement along the interstate, with law enforcement positioning their law enforcement vehicles along the interstate, looking for vehicles with out-of-state plates traveling to the east, presumably, according to law enforcement anyway, from Colorado, and then they're being pulled over and detained while law enforcement searches to determine whether or not the vehicle contains any what Nebraska would consider to be contraband marijuana purchased from Colorado.
So let me ask you this. So based simply on having a license plate that doesn't say Nebraska, is that constituting like a probable cause?
The officers know what they're doing as far as how to conduct a traffic stop. They're not pulling them over and stating the reason for the traffic stop was out-of-state plates. They'll follow the vehicle and wait for the vehicle to commit a traffic offense. Our Constitution says you can't pull a car over randomly or just because it has out-of-state plates. You have to wait for the vehicle to commit a traffic offense. What they'll typically do is wait for the vehicle to commit some sort of traffic offense, whether it be speeding or not using a turn signal or following too close, which is a favorite one of law enforcement, or crossing over the divider line or driving on the shoulder. There are innumerable number of traffic offenses that pretty much everybody commits on a regular basis, and law enforcement just waits until the vehicle commits that offense and then conducts the traffic stop.
Now, are the law enforcement, are they doing like the random open air dog searches, or are they doing anything to just kind of steer the line of questioning to be able to search the vehicle?
What they will typically do once they pull the vehicle over, what the law allows for them to do is conduct an inquiry that's related to the reason for the traffic stop. So in other words, if you pull somebody over for speeding or not using your turn signal, ask for license, insurance, registration, run the driver's name, maybe even the passenger's name for wants and warrants is what they would call it, to see if the person maybe has a warrant out for their arrest. They also run them for criminal history to see what sort of criminal history the individual may have. But that's what they're supposed to do during the course of the traffic stop are those basic inquiries. What try to do during the course of that inquiry is conduct conversations with the driver and or the passenger about travel plans and itinerary and things of that nature in an effort to try to what law enforcement calls indicators of criminal activity that in their opinion justifies detaining the individual beyond the scope of the original traffic stop. Once they get to that threshold in their mind, then typically what they will do is take the canine unit or a drug dog and do the open air sniff around the car, have the dog alert on the car, and then once the dog alerts, then it's their position that they have probable cause now to do a full-blown search of the vehicle.
And obviously at that time, if you've come back from Colorado, you're carrying your prescription, then you're going to be going to I would presume jail.
Most likely. It depends on if you're a medical patient, you're carrying your prescription. Whether you go to jail or not in Nebraska depends almost exclusively on how you choose to take your medicine. Nebraska has decriminalized user amounts of marijuana, or of the flower variety anyway, so that less than an ounce of marijuana is an infraction, and it's a $300 fine. It's a non-jailable offense. So if an individual is found with that, the officer writes the citation and sends them on their way. But with the advent of all the different varieties of ingestion with hash oil and edibles and those types of things, Nebraska classifies hash, or concentrated marijuana, as a Scheduled I controlled substance, which means we treat it the same as cocaine or methamphetamine or heroin. It's a Class 4 felony. It carries anywhere from 0 to 5 years in jail and a $10,000 fine. So if you choose to take your medicine in the hash variety, you're going to go to jail. You're going to get booked, taken to the jail, whatever county you happen to be pulled over in. Your car is going to get impounded. You're going to have to wait until a judge sets a bond on you before you can post bond and be released. And then you'll have to face the felony charge.
So, I'm in the Southwest. I'm in Arizona, and we obviously we have our medical law, but we also are plagued with quite outdated, quite archaic cannabis laws. We recently, in about the last year and a half, finally have what seemed to have overcome the difference in definition of dried flower versus a concentrated cannabis. But obviously, there's a ton of backlash that's constantly occurring. These interpretations that county attorneys think creates some kind of a loophole for what clearly the public has indicated that they want to see happen. So, I mean, obviously, in Nebraska, you have decriminalization. That doesn't mean that that hash should still be lumped into that same scenario. I mean, obviously, it's still cannabis, regardless of the preparation that has occurred on it. You guys have something that's kind of unique going on versus some of the other border states. Nebraska is actually suing Colorado right now because of their current legalization. What is your take on that?
Yes, Dave, Nebraska has filed a lawsuit along with Oklahoma against Colorado. It's one of those rare instances where our United States Supreme Court has jurisdiction over the case, and that's where the lawsuit has been filed. Nebraska is essentially claiming that because marijuana possession is still illegal, federally speaking, that its state law for recreational marijuana is in violation of the federal law, and they're asking this U.S. Supreme Court to declare it as such.
So basically, they're hoping for the preeminence of federal law over state law, which that sounds like life and liberty to me right there. We got to take a quick commercial break. When we get back, Daniel Stockmann with the Nebraska Interstate Drug Defense. We'll be right back with you, folks.
More State of Cannabis on CannabisRadio.com when we return.
Great websites today need expert web design and development and need to be e-commerce ready and mobile friendly. But building a marketable and profitable website can be an uphill climb. Ready to make your new website or replace your existing website? Think Orange as the new way to get in the black. Orange Hill Development works with Fortune 500 companies and offer the same top quality development service at a fraction of what other providers charge. Brands like Absolute, Carlsberg, and Nestea trust Orange Hill Development. Find out why you should trust your website with Orange Hill. Contact Orange Hill for a consultation today at orangehilldevelopment.com. Doc Rob, the concierge for better living.
Cannabis is just one of the many great plants that we have on this planet called Earth that we can use consciously and intelligently to improve our well-being.
Take a real, raw, inside look at healthier living while sharing great ideas and improvements for a better quality of life.
Learning to live and live well is a lifelong process. This is a journey. You could be 80 years old or 8 years old. You can still learn something that's going to make tomorrow a little bit healthier, a little bit easier, a little bit happier, a little bit better.
The concierge for better living with Doc Rob. Only on CannabisRadio.com.
Ignite the conversation on some trending topics along the Cannabis Radio social media network. Join our crew of thousands on our Cannabis Radio page on Facebook or at Canna Radio, CANNA Radio on Twitter. Plus, look for our Facebook and Google Plus pages for all of our original programs and connect with Dr. Dina, Kyle Cushman, Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Nurse Heather, Doc Rob, the hosts of Ganjapreneur, and more. Connect with the growing Cannabis Radio Social Crusade at Canna Radio on Twitter or search for Cannabis Radio on Facebook, Google Plus, and Instagram and grow with us.
Chronicling the latest cannabis industry news and headlines. Welcome back to the State of Cannabis, only on CannabisRadio.com. Once again, here's Dave Inman.
Welcome back to the State of Cannabis. I'm your host, Dave Inman. With us tonight, we have Daniel Stockmann, attorney for the Nebraska Interstate Drug Defense. Daniel, welcome. We were just discussing the current law Nebraska and Oklahoma have regarding Colorado's recreational law. I'm sure you have a ton more points that you'd like to touch on with that as well.
Yeah, what's interesting about the lawsuit, clearly the voters of Colorado decided that that's what they wanted to do in their state was allow for recreational marijuana to be legal. Nebraska, in its history and tradition, has long been a proud and vocal supporter of states' rights on every issue, particularly on things like gay marriage. Nebraska has been saying that, we should leave it up to the states. Let the states decide. And in Nebraska, our state decided that it should be a constitutional amendment banning gay marriage and that the federal government shouldn't be allowed to tell what to do. It should be left up to the individual states. However, when it becomes something that they disagree with, then the states' rights theory kind of gets thrown out the window. And now they want the federal government to intervene.
It's kind of like calling the pot calling the kettle black. I'd like to just toss a word out there, and I'm sure you have a couple of finer points to hit on with it. Whiteclay, Nebraska. Speaking of the last topic that we had, it seems to really so many of these states that they'll want these states' rights, but they'll want to have the government come in when they can't handle their own decisions. But what's going on in Whiteclay, Nebraska?
Well, let me give you a little info about what Whiteclay, Nebraska is. Whiteclay, Nebraska is a town of about 10 or 15 people. It is on the border of South Dakota. Across the border into South Dakota is the Pine Ridge, South Dakota, Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Whiteclay, Nebraska is about 2 miles or so from the reservation, but in Nebraska versus South Dakota. And as is federal law, there is no alcohol allowed on the Indian Reservation. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, alcohol is prohibited. Whiteclay, Nebraska, population 10 or 12 people, at last count in 2013, sold nearly 3.5 million 12-ounce cans of beers. The highest per capita beer or alcohol consumption or sales in the country. And almost all of that alcohol is being sold to the Native Americans who cross into Nebraska from South Dakota, purchase what is illegal on the reservation in Nebraska, and either consume it in Nebraska or try to bring it back onto the reservation. The tribal elders of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation have been begging the state of Nebraska to clamp down on alcohol sales in Whiteclay because of the devastating effects that it's having on the population of the Indian Reservation. And the state of Nebraska and its governor, or former governor anyway, have simply said, basically, well, what do you want us to do? They're not breaking the law. We can't do anything about it. And it's had devastating effects on the population of the reservation. I'm reading an article right now where the numbers that I'm quoting to you are from 2013. It's 3.6 million 12-ounce cans of beers in 2013. And that actually is a decrease of 7.8% from 2012. So,
oh my God.
The consumption is going down, but it went down almost 8%, and it's still over 3.5 million cans of beer in 1 year.
It's mind-boggling, when you can have so many varying degrees of certainty that are our states. And to highlight that, Nebraska, as you had said, is a decriminalized state. So if you have flower, it's a $300 ticket, non-jailable. But if you have hash, you're going to jail.
Yes.
And if you are on a border and you just happen to be selling alcohol, can sell as much of it as you want going into a state that would not allow it. Correct. It's just incredibly mind-boggling that these dualities can occur in a modern society without anybody realizing the detriment both ends have. Obviously, if we have a plant that hasn't killed anybody on record. When I mean anybody on record, I mean due to overdose. People die from stupidity all the time, but they don't die due to overdose. They may have a terrible trip. They may have to curl up in a ball for a few hours, but they're going to wake up and say, damn, I really shouldn't take so much ever again. However, with alcohol, there is a limit that you can take, and then eventually it's going to kill you. It's mind-boggling that we haven't pushed the envelope any further. We're going to take a commercial break here in a couple of minutes, but I want to get your thoughts on something. Obviously, 2016, we have a lot of different initiatives across the country. Does Nebraska have anything currently in the works regarding either legalization, medical, or further decriminalization?
Our legislature actually has a bill right now. Our legislature is in session right now. There is a medical bill that's made it through a couple rounds of voting so far. It's a pretty limited medical bill insofar as it's not going to allow for medical dispensaries to pop up. It's going to be administered through the Department of Health and Human Services, and the bill has actually delineated specific ailments or illnesses that would allow for the prescription. So it's a little bit surprising that Nebraska is actually progressive enough to get this close to at least an abbreviated version of a medical bill, but it's close.
It's interesting when you reflect and you look at the legislature in various states, and they can be just absolute opponents. And, even here in Arizona, like I had mentioned, but we have a very, very strict medical law. We have, potentially we're going to have tax and regulate come in 2016. But when you really look at what the populace has to say, and what I'll say is currently right now there's a from the Secretary of State's office on whether or not we should legalize and tax recreational marijuana. And it's been up for about 3 days, and currently it's 97% yes. It's the populace, and perhaps maybe it's a social media that's been able to push this more forward thinking for a lot of states. I mean, we're looking at Florida obviously came close to getting their constitutional amendment or their bill passed. We've seen a lot of states, even Alabama, that forging forward with various types of medical laws as well. We need to take a quick commercial break. When we get back, we have Attorney Daniel Stockmann with the Nebraska Interstate Drug Defense. We'll be right back with you, folks.
More State of Cannabis on CannabisRadio.com when we return.
Your connection to quality cannabis insurance services is spelled K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R. That's Karcher Insurance. We have worked with ventures like Cannabis for over 60 years. We're proud to represent over 50 companies with tailor-made cannabis plans for owners just like you to insure your product, your plants, and your pursuits. K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R spells out their full-service insurance services ranging from commercial to bonds, to personal, from life to health, and more. Contact the team at KarcherInsurance.com and let our experience work for you. That's K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R Insurance.com.
Contact Karen and the team at Karcher Insurance at 1-844-421-3560. That's 844-421-3560.
growing green to generate more green.
Hello to all you happy herbalizers, smiling, trippy hippies, and everyone who believes in freedom and tolerance. This is The Grow Show, and I'm Kyle Cushman.
From food to fuel, from remedy to resource.
Welcome my guest, Ed Rosenthal, the guru of ganja. Let me ask you, right now I hear your lighter clicking. Are you smoking indoor or are you smoking sun-grown?
What am I smoking? I'm smoking concentrate.
Way to get out of the answer there. So you're truly like the king, right? You just clap your hands and somebody brings you a bowl and you're all set, right?
I wish that were the case.
The Grow Show with Kyle Cushman, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Cannabis Confidential with Dr. Dina. Candid.
I want to give you the inside story.
Captivating.
I want to introduce you to my kind and amazingly talented friends.
Compelling.
We get to meet some of the most amazing cannabis activists and warriors around.
Listen in as medical marijuana pioneer Dr. Dina shares never-before-heard stories, chats with cannabis insiders and celebrity friends, and provides invaluable perspective and insight into one of the fastest-growing industries in the world.
I want to share with you what was once confidential information. Let's expose the truth, discuss the issues, and learn the facts.
Cannabis Confidential, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Chronicling the latest cannabis industry news and headlines. Welcome back to the State of Cannabis, only on CannabisRadio.com. Once again, here's Dave Inman.
Welcome to the State of Cannabis. I'm your host, Dave Inman. With us tonight, we have Daniel Stockmann, attorney with the Nebraska Interstate Drug Defense. Daniel, welcome back to the show. So we were just talking about a couple of different things, just some atrocities. Whiteclay boggles the mind. Obviously, the fact that Nebraska and Oklahoma are actually suing Colorado for their current law regarding cannabis legalization. Obviously, there's been a big influx because there's cannabis around, I'm sure. So you have a lot more border states that are going to see stuff coming out. People want to, take their wares with them when they're out traveling, of course. The biggest gating factor with the laws surrounding you right now?
I think the biggest factor that I've seen in the last year has really just been the increased investigation and interdiction by law enforcement. It's really getting to a point now. And just to give you some background info, in the last year alone, I have talked to on the phone over 20 people from over 25 different states were traveling through Nebraska on the interstate, heading east, presumably, according to law enforcement, coming from Colorado. They were pulled over on the interstate, detained, and searched by law enforcement. Some people are ending up with charges. Other people simply are just getting pulled over and detained and forced to spend an hour or two on the side of the road while law enforcement searches through all of their baggage. Anecdotal stories from people who have said they've been pulled over multiple times as they've traveled across Nebraska. I spoke with a mom from Connecticut whose 19-year-old son was in Colorado this past March for spring break with a couple of his buddies, and they were driving back east, and they got pulled over in the very first county that you can as they enter into Nebraska. They had user amounts of hash on them, so they all got booked for Class 4 felonies and got their car impounded. They posted bond, got out of jail, got their car out of the impound lot, and proceeded to drive back home, only to be pulled over 2 more times as they traveled through Nebraska. They weren't arrested at that point, but they were pulled over a total of 3 times as they traveled east across Nebraska.
And that was on the same trip?
Same trip, yes.
Jesus.
They 3 19-year-old white males in a car heading east. Law enforcement presumes that they have contraband from Colorado. We were talking about the lawsuit earlier, and it's my opinion, and it's opinion of a lot of criminal defense attorneys in Nebraska, that law enforcement's making a point of enforcing this and doing this interstate interdiction type stuff because they are being told they need to do it to support the lawsuit. They need to show that this is a problem in Nebraska and that it's affecting law enforcement in the counties and the court, in the criminal justice system, and they can't do it if they don't strictly enforce it.
So just like the movement from alcohol prohibition to cannabis prohibition, we had all these prohibitionist police officers that they needed to keep their jobs. Sure. And they needed to be able to have something to highlight that said, hey, look at what we did here. And, prohibition is live and well. And it's incredible that there's so many people that you'll bump into, even, just on a day-to-day basis, that don't realize that, cannabis is a Schedule I narcotic. And it's federally mandated. It's kept all of our medical testing at bay because of these limitations that it has. It's just devastating what happens to families over something as simple, benign, non-toxic, and shows so many potential benefits to not only the body, the mind, and perhaps even society.
Think about it from the view of the local taxpayer too, Dave. I mean, we're talking about some small rural counties in Nebraska that don't have very big budgets. A few of these sheriffs are bankrupting their counties because they won't stop this interdiction enforcement, and they're jailing people and prosecuting people, and their local county doesn't have the budget to support the prosecutions. Their jails aren't big enough. The evidence rooms aren't big enough. They don't have enough lawyers. They don't have enough prosecutors. They're overloading the court system, costing the county hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're supposed to be using for the rest of the county, not for the uptick in law enforcement and increase in criminal justice budget, because these sheriffs won't stop enforcing it.
Sounds like a wonderfully efficacious way to spend our hard-earned tax dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. It's incredible the dualities that occur in our existence here, and thank you for highlighting that, and really driving home for some of the more fortunate in obviously Colorado, Washington, the medical states that don't realize that these types of things actually exist still to this day, and to the degree in which Nebraska is obviously experiencing it. And thank you for being a champion and standing up for the people's rights and helping untangle this mess that law has bestowed upon us. Daniel, thank you. We'll have to get you on the show again one of these days soon. Another installment of the State of Cannabis. Again, Daniel Stockmann, Nebraska Interstate Drug Defense, and I'm Dave Inman. Have a wonderful night, folks.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts, and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast or redistribution without proper consent of CannabisRadio.com is prohibited.